I'm going to share with you all that I know, okay? But I must realize, we did just send the POM down the hall a couple weeks ago. So the FY20 submission is down there being looked at. We're starting that defense of that. So there's no final decisions, obviously, on that. It's going to be several months before that heads across over to the Congress. So I can't really talk about that kind of details. I can talk in generalities of where we're heading. AUSA, as I said, is right around the corner. Our Army leadership likes to roll out stuff at AUSA. And so there's some things there that, I don't want to get out in front of our leadership as they make some announcements here that I'm sure they'll do. And then I said, I'm going to tell you all I know. I've been here, as I said, this is my 7th day, I think, in the G-8 job. So it might be a little bit limited, but I will share my thoughts. This breakfast does remind me, though, of a different job. When I came out of Iraq the last time, I was told I was going to leave in 4th ID as a DCG, working for General Perkins, and then the Army put me as to be the Comprehensive Soldier Fitness Director. My gosh, I really screwed up this DCG job. What's going on? If you've ever heard General Hams talk about career progression for him, I felt a lot like him at a certain points in his career that he's recounted when I heard. And so I get in this job, and I'm on the 2nd day of this job. It's over Crystal City, and this colonel comes in and says, "Hey, I'm your PAO, by the way. I do 5 other jobs. I'm also your PAO. ACPA just called. They want you to do a live interview on CNN, not tomorrow, but the next day, about comprehensive soldier fitness. Will you do it?" I said, "Yeah, I'll do it, but what do I do? I need to get smart." And so all the next day, I think that was on a Tuesday. Wednesday, I just studied. I had them come in and explain what it was. Then said Thursday morning, I'm at this Crystal City office. Here comes a limo. A limo picks me up from CNN, drives me across the river to their office in D.C., get in there, they put makeup on me, put me mic'd up, go into this little room by yourself. I've never done that before. You're talking to somebody in Atlanta, you can hear them jabbering. Get on there, it's about a 10-minute thing. I thought it went okay. Told them what I knew, So I get out and going home, riding across the room around this limo, feeling pretty good about myself. My best BlackBerry days, just firing up. I'm looking at everybody in the world telling me how great I am. Sir, home run, that's the best. What a great guy. You really knocked it out of the park. Well, I thought I'd call my son. Jay was home. It was right before Christmas. Called Jay. He's home watching my little one at the time. He's like a 3rd grader. I said, "Hey, Jay, I'm getting a lot of good feedback here. You see Dad on TV a little bit ago." He said, "Yeah, Dad, I saw you. What do you think?" He said, "Luke's my little one." I said, "Well, Luke thought you looked like a dork." And I'll tell you, I needed that at that time to bring, leave it to your family to keep you humble. I'll steal General Halverson. I heard was that something where Karen was the wind shear beneath your wings. And so, but I feel a little bit like that today. I probably will look a little bit like a dork up here as I get through this as the new G8. So I do want to talk about maybe 15, 20 minutes here on a few things. Really, I'll start on the front end about where I think we are and where we're going. And then I'll wrap it up with why it's different this time, because I think we've seen or heard some of this stuff before, but I do think it's different, and I'll wrap up with that, and then with some questions at the end. So where we're at today and where we're heading, I'll recount some of this. I think it's important to establish a baseline. You've probably heard it all before if you've been around the city for the last year or so. Before I get into some of the modernization things that I think are important to talk about. So again, the 2018 National Defense Strategy provides clear strategic guidance that shaped our FY19 budget submission. That's almost final. And it continues to shape our FY20 submission that we just gave to OSD. Now, I just read the classified version of that recently, since I've been in this job. I was told, "Hey, don't say you just read it, it might not." Well, I was in Japan as a commander out there. I was really busy. I hadn't read it until last week. But I was very impressed about the continuity of that document. If you read the classified version, ends, ways, and means, and really makes a solid case for where we're going as a nation on the defense side. And now, as outlined in the NDS, the national security environment, it's typified by the reemergence of long-term strategic competition by revisionist powers whose use of their position in the within the international order to change the international norms in their favor. So with that as a baseline, I think there's a couple of key points with regard to technology. The first is that the pace of technological innovation is putting military and disruptive technologies in the hands of state and non-state actors at a relatively cheap or affordable cost. Gone are the days when only first world nations had difference-making technologies. Second is the technological advancement over the next couple of decades will drive a change in the character of war. You've heard General Milley. He's testified to that in public and talks about it a lot. If you think back to World War I, where we went from the horse cavalry to the tank and how that changed things. If you ever read the history in the 1920s, or the loudest voices were those where they're defending the horse cavalry. This tank isn't something that really had a long lead time. We need to go be loyal to our history and not change things. In short, I think the competitive advantage that the U.S. Army has enjoyed for a long time, not just the Army, but all our services, is being challenged in all the domains: air, maritime, air, cyber, land, cyber, and space, The Modernization Strategy for the U.S. Army, published in May of 1918, has one simple focus: make soldiers and units more lethal. Now, the term lethality you hear a lot in the NDS. If you ever hear Secretary Mattis talk, a word that comes out of his mouth pretty early on and often is the importance of lethality as we move forward. To that end, the Army has, of course, as you probably know, 6 modernization priorities. I'll recount them for some of you that may not know them: long-range precision fires, next-generation combat vehicles, future vertical lift, the Army network, air and missile defense, and soldier lethality. So the rapid pace of technological change, coupled with the speed of innovation that we're seeing in today's world, demands that the Army makes changes to the way we develop and deliver capabilities for our soldiers. Hence, Army Futures Command. Unveiled about 3 weeks ago, now commanded, thankfully, a good friend, General Mike Murray, just unfurled the colors on the 24th of August. This headquarters will establish unity of command and effort by consolidating the modernization enterprise under a single command. And this realignment is not about creating new Army structure, another headquarters, but rather streamlining of work to overcome the bureaucratic inertia and stovepiping that we're all very familiar with in this room. The establishment of AFC, I'll call it that from here on out, marks the most significant change of reorganization within our Army since 1973, when our Forces Command and TRADOC came to be. And as it stands up, its goal is to continue to shrink the requirements process, which has taken for our significant systems 3 to 5 years to get that less than a year, and to move those requirement writers closer to the acquisition executors as we try and do that. Critical to this effort are the 8 cross-functional teams that support the 6 modernization priorities. Each CFT, they will incorporate elements of acquisition, testing, resourcing, capability development, communities, and direct reporting to our senior leaders. That's part of the streamlining that I talked about. And while we know the AFC will have an impact on the roles and responsibilities of other headquarters in the Army staff, to include the G-8, we're on the front end of figuring out what that means to us. We're not really quite sure how it's going to end up in the long run. I'm talking about the organization and some of our procedures. We have a DA order that established the organization of AFC, and it's taken certain organizations and units and placed it under AFC as a start. I don't know if Paul Ostrowski's in here. Maybe he didn't make it, but I sat down with Paul a couple days ago for just a meet and greet, and he described it. What we've done is, there's 2 ways to build a park. One way is you kit it all out. You do the playground, you do the basketball courts, the skate park, the bathrooms and stuff, and you actually lay in the sidewalks based on your design. Another way you do all those things with it amongst the trees, and you don't put any sidewalks in, you let people walk around them for 6 months or so, you see where the paths are, and then you lay your sidewalks, because that's the connective tissue that makes it most effective. We're doing that second iteration, is we're piecing it together, but we don't have it all quite figured out. We're going to ride it for a while and see where those sidewalks need to be laid once we figure out the procedures that'll make us most effective at with the modernization process for our Army as we move to the future. Lastly, with regard to AFC, with AFC in the lead, the Army is embracing new technology. Some of it talked a little bit about, I think, by General Ham here. Quantum computing, high energy lasers, directed energy weapons, hypersonics, and artificial intelligence. In addition to AFC and what it will do, the Army is updating the multi-domain operations concept. We're moving from it being a concept to eventually how the Army is going to fight. It'll become our doctrine of this century. And we believe that'll be out sometime soon, the next iteration of that. We need that to help guide our modernization process and efforts in the future to integrate our doctrine with what we're developing. In the perfect world, you do all that up front, and it leads to a capability. That's not the real world. It all happens at the same time. The world just won't stop to let us just develop things in a logical, sequential order. It always is this iterative process of back and forth, and that's what we're going to realize here in the near future. The signed 2019 NDAA that supports the modernization effort of the U.S. Army. And it ensures we're prepared to address the challenges posed with today's complex national security environment. The Army's goal is to be modernized by FY28, which is in line with the National Defense Strategy. Recent increases in our resources have helped solve a lot of our challenges we've had in the past with regard to modernization. The $23 billion increase in Army top line from the FY17 actuals to the FY19 request is a 19% increase in Army top line and will support our readiness and modernization efforts. Specifically, when it comes to research, development, and acquisition, that's been a $5.6 billion increase from 17 actuals to where we are in the 19 submission, a 21% increase, again, in RDA. EDI, or European Defense Initiative, just had a session on that yesterday by chance. It continues to allow us to enable to significantly accelerate and modernize our Abrams and Bradley fleet. We're going to fill out the second ABCT in the pre-position stocks in Europe, APS-2, with the most modern tanks and fighting vehicles along with the AMPV. And EDI has also allowed us to begin to set the theater with regard to preferred munitions. Additional resources have also allowed us to make a significant investment in our global stockpile of preferred munitions, an area of underinvestment over the last few years. We've also requested to increase our FY18 RDTE funding to jumpstart development and prototyping efforts in our modernization priorities. The two-year budget deal that we're familiar with has been a good start toward reversing historical shortfalls in modernization funding. For about the last decade, we've not had the resources to focus on future modernization, as we were prioritizing near-term readiness to support our operations and ensure they succeeded in Iraq and Afghanistan. When I was in PA&E 5 or 6 years ago, that's what we did. The BCA cap hit. The strategic choices and decisions that were made is we were going to draw down the force to reduce that account, how much it costs us to pay soldiers. We were going to tear into our capital accounts, include modernization, and we were putting it all into near-term readiness to make sure that soldiers, when they went into combat, they were ready to go. But I'd say 2 years of increased resources by themselves will not reverse that trend that we're on right now. And I'll put a damper on all this good feeling here a little bit by there is still the chance or the risk of BCA levels of funding returning in FY20. We do appreciate the efforts of Congress right now to pass the appropriation and authorization bills on time this year. You're probably tracking the FY19 Appropriation Conference Bill came out, I think it was last week. I think the Senate voted on it a day or two ago, passed it. And I think the House is going to vote on the Appropriations Bill next week. Hopefully it'll pass and it'll get to the President prior to 1 October. That'll be the first time in 10 years that's happened. And having been in command in Japan, working on CRs and stuff, I will tell you, really an inefficient way to run a railroad. So we thank Congress for their efforts this year. To ensure the Army is investing in the right capabilities, over the last few months, our Secretary of Army, Esper, and the Chief of Staff, General Milley, they personally conducted an exhaustive review of over 500 modernization programs, known as the EEPEG, if you know the vernacular in the building, the EEPEG deep dives or night court, and identified, it was supposed to be at night apparently, and then they figured out this is important, let's do it in the day when we all work instead of doing it at night. But it sought to identify programs that do not directly align with the Army modernization priorities and where the Army can accept risk with regard to modernization. Now, the general guidance going into that review was if the program does not directly contribute to readiness and lethality, the NDS guidance, why are we doing it? And so some of the key insights coming out of that, those reviews, it produced a lot of funds that we shifted around inside of that PEG from those that weren't aligned with the NDS into our modernization priorities. And again, I can't get into the details. That's been just sent down the hall recently for OSD's review. The Army leadership made some very hard choices for POM 2024 to ensure we could fix or fund those 6 priorities, those modernization priorities. And everything after that competed, that infamous term. It will compete for what's left over. We're doing an additional analysis right now to follow up on those initiatives. We're going to do deep dives next time around. Again, take a hard look at it as we work on POM 21-25. So while the CFTs are clearly our modernization priorities, the Army's not walking away from our legacy systems. In fact, parts of our Army will fight longer on legacy systems under a current strategy. Let's not forget that our legacy systems is kind of a pejorative term, a little bit to me, when you say legacy. They're excellent. I mean, I commanded a straight M1 tank company back in 1981 at Fort Hood. If you remember the JJ numbers on tanks, I had some single-digit ones in my company, okay? They were beat-up old tanks. But to the uneducated guy, that M1 tank compared to the M1A2 Charlie, that's what the new term for the SEP V3, it looks like the same product until you get up on it or you know what you're talking about. It is night and day capability, the best tank in the world. The problem is our peer competitors have built good stuff while we've been making incremental, excellent changes. They've been making fundamental changes, and they're much closer to where we are today, if you want to use that term, legacy systems. So as stated, there were hard decisions made by the Army leadership, but these choices were in line with what the Secretary of Defense was asking us to do. And the results will be a more lethal force capable to fight and win in the future. The key now is to resource those priorities, expedite the concept to capability process, that's AFC's charge, and get the capability in soldiers' hands as soon as possible. So that's what we've done and where we're going. So quickly, why is it different this time? Okay, so I've been in the Pentagon since '92 was the first time. A lot of the guys in here have been here early, that doesn't sound long to some of you guys, been here longer than that. Or if you've been around the city, you've probably said, I've heard this all before. I've been these things, I've been these breakfasts or heard other things, heard the term inflection point. I think I heard General Sullivan say that, inflection point. We were drawn down after the Cold War, and I was in SSW, War Plants Division, figuring out what division patches were going away. I looked up inflection point, I Googled it, because it's a cool term. We all kind of nod our heads. Well, here's what it says. A stationary point on a curve at which the tangent is horizontal or vertical and where tangents on either side have the same sign. Yeah, so that's inflection point. It's some kind of a calculus or something. I don't know. I never took calculus. But You hear inflection point. It's important. It's like we got to jumpstart the system because we're at an inflection point. Heard it all before. Next, you hear it like we're behind. We had an epiphany. We woke up. We got to listen. We're on our rear ends. We got to get after it. So again, I've heard that along for several times, almost every tour in the Pentagon. This is my 5th one. So I think it's different this time for several reasons. First, our SecDef has made a clear statement that we must focus our efforts on developing capability in response to near-peer competitors by FY22. That's when we need to be ready, while continuing to manage our effort in CENTCOM. Now that's different. We've been focused on CENTCOM for a long time and making sure that we do everything to prioritize that at the cost of modernization, at the cost of other things. Now we're not walking away from our soldiers that we're putting in harm's way. We're still making sure they're trained and ready and resourced to go. But that's a very small percentage of our Army anymore. And the SecDef is saying the priority in the department is now near-term, near-peer competition and being prepared for potential conflict, ready by 22, modernized for that by 28. That is different than in the past. Our Army leadership, the Secretary and the Chief, are into the details. That is different. It is their program. They can talk it as well as Thomas and I can in some instances. That's scary, okay? And if you've heard Secretary Esper, he knows this stuff. He'll call your bluff on it. It's their program with their understanding of the details inside the program and their personal commitment of time delving into the minutia. That's definitely different. I think it's going to continue. We have a new 4-star command that'll focus on, and this is a quote, I just pulled it, I got it at Google. I pulled it off of General Murray's website, but I think it's a pretty good description. Utilizing the best expertise, whatever the source, to create innovative solutions faster and better to make sure soldiers have what they need before they need it. The command's bringing experts and authorities together under one roof to streamline the process to produce outcomes that make a difference. So again, that is different this time around. And finally, it's different this time around because the resources are there right now. Congress has acted, and we have the ability to resource our priorities to make a difference. And again, that's different. So in conclusion, I was in Japan for 3 years. Wow, what a great deal. I miss it. But there's a Japanese saying that vision without action is a dream. Action without vision is a nightmare. Luckily, we have a vision that's out in front of action right now. And that vision is unambiguous as where we need to go in the future. And the Army has put into motion a plan of action to get there. On the eve of World War II, General Marshall, I was just in the Secretary's office a couple days ago for something. His portrait sits right over his desk. As he's doing email, there's General Marshall staring right at him. He said right before World War II, years ago we had the time to prepare and no resources. Today we have the resources, but no time. But right now we're in a good place. Maybe it is an inflection point, because right now we have both. We have some time and we have the resources. So now's the time to act wisely. And while the Army's number one priority still and always will remain readiness, it's General Milley, we're realigning resources and leveraging the time we do have now to fundamentally shift the direction of Army modernization. So General Ham, thanks again for allowing me to be here. If I come next year, I can probably talk a little more on my feet about some details. I want to thank again VT Systems for being a great host today for the breakfast, and thank everybody for being here. Thank you. Okay, so I'll reiterate, I've been here 7 days, so I'm ready for questions.
Hi, sir. Jen Judson with Defense News.
Sure.
You mentioned that the Army is not walking away from legacy systems, but we know that in the National Defense Strategy, there's a push to sort of start to move away from legacy systems in favor of modernized equipment. So are we going to see major changes in FY20 and in the POM where you're walking away potentially from some of the planned upgrades for legacy systems, things like that, in order to allow for funding for future systems?
Yeah, thanks for the question. Well, we're committed to the legacy systems. We really don't have another option in the near term here. You've heard General Murray, I think his quote was, "Hey, you're not going to see me come up with a new tank in a year," I think was the quote recently. Might have been to Congress when he testified last week. So I won't say stuck. We have, as I said, good systems that we continue to make better incrementally over time. Will we have to go into those systems in the future and POMs to get the money that we think we need when we have better visibility of the requirements as we move forward, as we define the requirements and really figure out how much it's going to cost? That might happen. Those are strategic decisions our leadership is really going to have to make. I think this time around proved that they'll make hard decisions to prioritize those CFTs and what they're working for. And so that will be a debate within the building, within the Army staff and the Secretariat. And I will tell you the ACOMs have a lot of say in this anymore, a lot more than in the past. And then our leadership, the Secretary and the Chief, will make the decision that's best for the Army. And it'll include a hard look at our legacy systems, but I don't know where that'll spin out. That's a lot of analysis I'll be in the middle of and others. So thanks for the question.
General Pasquarette,
Yeah.
First off, thanks for coming in here, especially 7 days into the job. Well done as you kick this off. J.D. Johnson from Raytheon. Secretary just put out a directive here in the last couple of weeks describing the role of Army Futures Command and ASALT in the acquisition world.
Right.
And it addresses the Future Command's role in the POM process and budgeting. I wonder if you could give us some early reflections on how you see that working as we move forward.
Yeah. Well, I read General Murray and the Under were up there last week on the Hill testifying. A lot of questions about the ASALT, making sure we stay clean on Goldwater Nichols and civilian oversight and ASALT's responsibilities that can't be merged under AFC. That won't happen. So there's still going to be that division that exists today will still be there. It doesn't mean we're not going to work hard on the acquisition side to streamline that everywhere we can too. That order that you talked about had described other checkpoints in the future and other studies we need to look at to where do the sidewalks need to go that I talked about earlier in that analogy. And it had some requirements to come back to explain in more detail what the relationships are going to be that we think we know right now, but we need to take a hard look at and actually ride it for a while and find out what the right answer is to be. And again, I'd say with the outcome being the most effective process to modernize our Army as quickly as possible. So thanks, sir. J.D. Johnson, one of my heroes. Want to continue to want to be like you when I grow up one day.
Hi, sir. Sidney Friedberg, Breaking Defense.
Yes.
I have my little clutch together spreadsheet of the 2019 Appropriations Bill open on my laptop.
Okay.
And I'd like to get your set. Obviously there are some things that Congress changed. They do that.
Yes.
How are you guys going to deal with those changes? I understand there's a plus up for aviation.
Yeah.
There's actually a little less money for munitions than you originally asked for,
Yeah.
way back in February, if anyone can remember that long. So how does that shape your program?
Sure.
How do you guys adjust for that? And what do you have to go sort of shrug and say, okay, we're going to have to come back and ask this,
Yeah.
better, explain it next year?
I see my good friend Thomas Horlander over here. I'm surprised you're not in the building figuring this all out, Thomas. Listen, I'll tell you what I think. We do have the ATR coming together. I'm not sure exactly where that's at for 18, which is moving some money around, or Thomas and his guys have been working that hard. Yeah, we've looked hard and we've dissected that. The FD guys that work for me told me what we think is in the conference bill and how that's the puts and takes on that. And then we have the FY20 we sent down the street to OSD. We are going to need to take a good hard look at what this all means once it settles, and look at what we have to do to realign the resources to get after our priorities. So yeah, there's hard work to be done. And Thomas and I will be working closely. It's much more in his lane with the things you described. given his responsibilities. I'm on the programmatic side. He's on the, the budget near-term fight. But I'd say if at the break, if you're still here, you might want to bend Thomas's ear. He's probably better suited to talk that. Okay. All
Any
right.
other questions? All right, let's give General Pasquarette a big round of applause.